The Bible is a love story. Now I know what you're thinking. Lori, I've read the Bible and it isn't a love story, is it? Oh, but it is. But before we get into that, let's go back a step. I'm Lori. This is the Bible Brief, where we will be going book by book and taking a bigger look at the Bible. We'll look at the narrative, the history, the context, all that big stuff so that we can better understand its meaning in our lives. Let me start with maybe a story that can help illustrate what we're going to do. When I was a kid, I read the Bible and heard the Bible stories, and I thought that it was always about these paragons of virtue, these ancestors that I was supposed to emulate, and they were just almost perfect in every way. And if I could learn from them, then I could be more like God in my life. Take, for example, the story of Esau and Jacob. They're some of my favorites. They're twins. Esau's the first twin, and Jacob's the second twin. When Esau's born, he's red and hairy, so they name him Esau, which means red and hairy. I love that. Hey, red. And then Jacob's born. And when Jacob's born, he's grabbing onto the heel of his older brother. So they name him the heel grabber, which is kind of what Jacob means. So his name means heel grabber, kind of usurper, deceiver. It's probably not a name you'd name your kid, but it's important in the story. Jacob was trying to get the birthright, a term called primogenitor. See, way back then, that was a super big deal, that the oldest son would get the birthright. And with the birthright, he got all the inheritance and the blessings. He got twice as much land. He got basically all the powers and authority that came with his family. Now, his family was a very famous family. It's the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yeah, that Jacob. So he's trying to get that, even from birth. So when I read that story, I was like, there must be something more to it. Because see, later in the story, Jacob tricks Esau into giving away that birthright for a pot of stew. Esau's kind of the sporty son. He reminds me of kind of the sports guy at school. He's the alpha male. He's out hunting all the time, and he's really aggressive. His father is so proud of Esau. And Jacob's a little more bookish. He's more associated with his mom, Rebecca. And so you're not really sure who to root for, who's the hero in this story. As it goes on, we learn more about Jacob. He does trick his brother. He does get the birthright. Now, Esau does sell it for a pot of soup, so there's something to say about Esau too. Later, however, Jacob. He has a series of visions and dreams. In one of them, he sees God himself. And another, he sees a ladder and he sees angels going up and down to heaven. But that's not the important part of the story. The important part of the story with me is, as I reflected on Jacob, I was like, wait, I thought he was supposed to be this perfect guy. And his story wasn't always that perfect. And that's kind of what I wanted to share with you, that sometimes the story of the Bible is not about perfect people, but it's about God working with those people. And the story of the Bible, when we understand the bigger picture, things like primogenitor, the names and what they mean, kind of the history and what was going on with that family, we can better understand the Bible. So that's what we'll do together in the Bible Brief. So this first one, let's talk about the Bible itself. Now, the Bible isn't one book, but it's a series of books. It's a library of books, and they have all different styles. Those styles are called genre. You're probably familiar with this in just everything that you consume now as far as media. You sometimes watch videos like this. You probably read something like a cookbook. You also read fiction, history, all different styles. And you don't expect those styles to have the same outcomes. Let's say you want to bake a cake. You wouldn't pick up a book like Harry Potter and say, I wonder how to bake a cake in here. Well, you might, but I hope you wouldn't look to Harry Potter to learn how to bake a cake. But that's kind of what the Bible is like too. There are these different styles, and different styles have different meanings and things that we can kind of look for to help us understand. Overall, it's mostly a narrative. It's mostly a series of stories. And then these styles pop in every once in a while. So you'll get things like law. And the law is not like a law book, but it's narrative with these instructions that come along with it. You'll also get poetry and poems and proverbs. You'll even get laments when people cry out to the Lord with what terrible things are going on in their lives. Lord, help me in these terrible things. Some of my favorites are when they mix the genres. So you'll be hearing a story and they'll be moving along, and then suddenly they'll break into a poem. It reminds me of a musical, Broadway musical. They're walking around talking, and then all of a sudden they're singing. The Bible has stories like that too. Each of those genres, again, has a different style and a different intent, and helping identify them help us identify really what's going on in the story. The Bible, besides being a large collection of different genres and styles, also has two distinct halves. Traditionally, you have the Old Testament and the New Testament. If you're Jewish, however, you don't call the Old Testament, you just call it the Hebrew Bible. Makes sense, right? It's just the one half. And then to kind of break those up, we call the other half the Christian scriptures. Hebrew Bible, Christian scriptures, Old Testament, New Testament. And all those genres are kind of sprinkled throughout. Now, additionally, how many books are there really in there? Well, depends on what denomination you're from. For Protestant denominations, there are about 66 books of the Bible. If you're Catholic, there are a few more. There are 73. And yet there are other denominations and faith practices that have up to 84 total books. Everyone pretty much agrees what's in that old part, but somewhere around 200 BC to 400 AD, there are a number of other writings that people are unsure if they're truly scripture or if they have something to add about God. And those are those other books that people use. There are different names for those different collections. Sometimes it's the Apocrypha, the deuterocanonical books, etc. But it just identifies where those books are. If you haven't had a chance to read those, take a look at them and see if you don't learn something from those too. One of the words that defines what those books are is called canon. Canon comes from a Greek term meaning measuring stick or yardstick. And that's all it is just what is the standard? What is the right thing to do? So a number of biblical authorities for different traditions have come forth and said, these books are the books that we use. Because of course there were other writings and poems and songs and histories that were being written, but which ones are scriptural and inspired about the divine and which are just the stories of the day. So that's what canon is. I like to think of canon using a modern reference, one you might appreciate, and that's Star Wars. No, don't at me down below about using Star Wars. Star Wars is awesome. But Star Wars. You probably remember Star Wars when it first came out. There were just a few movies. Then over the decades, it became movies and comic books and other books and cartoons and just everything you can imagine. When Lucasfilms came on board and said, I want to sell to Disney, Disney kind of pared that down into what they call the canon. So they said these stories are the canon and these other stories are legends. Now you might still enjoy the legends, but that's not really what happens in the story. That's canon. So again, not to diminish the Bible being true and Star Wars probably not, but it's a great analogy, right? So that's canon. All right, so you've learned a little bit about genre. You've learned a little bit about what books make up the Bible. We've also learned a little bit of how to take the overview of the structure. What else is there to learn? Well, first, we have to remember that these books were written in the past by cultures that aren't our own. So it's a little bit like time travel. So if you were to go back even 200 years, life where you live today wouldn't be the same. The Bible is no different. As we go back in history, we say these cultures are different and they speak a different language. They have different customs. They don't treat each other the same way. And so it's a little bit hard to understand. That's the same thing in the Bible. It's time travel. We're going back thousands of years and we're trying to understand where they're coming from in a life that's not very much like our own. So we'll take a look at that. Some things will help will be the cultural background and the history, but another will be the languages. The Bible was originally written in Hebrew, Aramaic, which was kind of the language of Jesus' time, and the Assyrians, very common, and then Greek in the New Testament. So we'll take a look at those. You don't have to learn those though. We'll kind of sprinkle in some words so we understand. But all of those things will help us understand the Bible a little better. So let's go back to the first question. Is the Bible a love story? Yeah, it is. But it's not a love story about us interacting in our relationships necessarily with each other. It's a story about God's relationship with us, humanity, and how much we're imperfect. Kind of like Jacob, we're imperfect beings, and how he's going to work with these imperfect beings, us and everybody else, to push forward humanity, to accomplish his goals, to show his love and his growth to save us. And that's the love story about the Bible. Thanks for watching. If you want to watch more, click on the links provided. You can also leave a comment down below, and you can hit a like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell. Thanks.